Why don't you just disappear? My husband snapped during a promotion dinner after my boss laughed and said, "You're lucky your wife hasn't left you yet." My husband looked around, took off his tie, and said, "She tried, until she found out about you and her sister." The table went dead silent, and I just sat there smiling. My name is Celine, and I've spent most of my adult life crafting an image, a tidy, dependable one. I'm 45 now, the kind of woman who people assume has it all figured out. I've got the corner office, the business card with Senior Marketing Director embossed in tasteful gold. A polished life in a gentrified part of Austin, with exposed brick walls and a kitchen that smells like coffee and eucalyptus candles most mornings. On the outside, everything looked fine, controlled, stable, but underneath? The ground had been shifting for years. I married Neil when I was 27. He was one of those men who made decisions fast and wore his heart like a flag. Loud, charming, sometimes reckless, but he made me laugh, and back then, that was enough. We met at a friend's 4th of July party. He brought homemade barbecue ribs and won everyone over in 5 minutes flat. I remember thinking, that's a man who knows how to live. Our marriage started like any other. Road trips, takeout dinners, arguments over who left the lights on. We bought a modest house on the east side, painted it ourselves one long, humid summer. We even carved our initials in the pantry door frame. It was ordinary, and I loved it for that. But people change. And sometimes they change quietly. I had started spending more time at work by the time I turned 40. The company was growing fast, and the pressure to deliver, to prove myself in a field crowded with younger, shinier talent, kept me grinding long hours. Neil said he understood. He even joked about becoming a marketing widower. "You'll outgrow that office before we outgrow each other," he once told me, over greasy diner coffee at 2 a.m. after one of my product launches. I believed him. I really did. But somewhere along the way, the space between us stopped being temporary. We'd sit across from each other at dinner and have nothing to say. He started coming home later, saying he had to meet clients or that traffic was bad. I stopped asking questions. It wasn't indifference. It was survival. A quiet agreement that it was easier to let the silence win than to pull each other into another exhausting conversation about how tired we both were. And then my sister Brielle started showing up more. She was 6 years younger than me and had always lived in her own orbit. The kind of person who treated life like a party she might leave at any moment if the playlist got boring. She had never really stuck to anything for long jobs, relationships, apartments, but she had that wild, kinetic energy people are drawn to. I didn't mind when she started dropping by on weekends. She said she missed me, missed home, that Houston was too loud and too lonely. Neil always seemed extra attentive when she was around. He'd offer her drinks, cook her favorite meals, laugh a little too hard at her jokes. I told myself I was imagining it. Until I wasn't. It was the way she looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching. The kind of gaze that lingered a second too long. And Neil? He stopped being careful. He started texting more. Smiling at nothing. Locking his phone. He had never locked his phone before. The truth arrived in pieces, not all at once. A hotel receipt. A toothbrush in his travel bag that wasn't mine. A missed call from Brielle at 11:43 p.m. on a night he claimed to be in a meeting. Still, I said nothing. Because sometimes, knowing is worse than wondering. But I didn't plan to stay blind. I started collecting things. Small things. A copy of our phone bill. Screenshots. Bank statements. I tracked dates. Locations. Patterns. I became a detective in my own life, all while putting on lipstick every morning and smiling through back-to-back meetings. There was one night, early fall, when I found myself staring at our reflection in the bathroom mirror. Neil was brushing his teeth beside me, humming some old country tune. I looked at him like he was a stranger. My throat tightened. I didn't cry. I just stared. That was when I decided. If he wanted out, I'd give it to him. But on my terms, not his. And definitely not hers. The promotion came that November. After 12 years at the company, countless presentations, and too many sacrifices to name, I was finally being recognized. My boss, Martin, suggested a dinner, just a few people from the executive team, their spouses, some wine, and a private room at a steakhouse downtown. I made sure Neil came. He hadn't been to one of my work events in over a year. He said they bored him. But I insisted this time. I told him it meant something. He wore his good blazer. I wore a navy sheath dress and heels that pinched. We didn't talk much on the way there. I watched the streetlights flicker on as we drove past the river. Martin was in rare form that night. He made the kind of jokes you could only get away with if you had power and charm to burn. The drinks flowed. The steak was rare and bloody. Everyone was relaxed, laughing. Then, just as dessert was being served, Martin leaned in, tipsy, and pointed a fork at Neil. "You're a lucky man," he said, grinning. "Most guys would have been left in the dust by now. HLL, with how hard she works, I'm surprised she hasn't left you already." He laughed. Others chuckled politely. Neil didn't. He sat still for a moment, then slowly loosened his tie. The motion was deliberate, almost theatrical. "She tried," he said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Until she found out about you and her sister." Silence fell like a curtain. Forks froze. Someone gasped. Martin blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked. But Neil wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring at me. My face didn't change. I took a sip of wine and set the glass down carefully. Neil stood up, looked around the room, then walked out without another word. The only sound left was the clinking of ice in glasses. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Let them all sit with it. Let them wonder. 3 days later, I moved out. Not because I was ashamed, but because it was finally over. And I wanted the ending to be mine. I moved into a short-term rental on the other side of the river. One of those new places with sterile white walls and too much chrome. The kind of apartment that looked like nobody had ever cried there, and that's exactly why I chose it. It felt like a hotel. Temporary. Impersonal. But at least it was mine. The silence in that space was different. Not oppressive like it had been in the house with Neil. This one was emptier, but also cleaner somehow. I could breathe here. Think. And every time I sat on the edge of the too-firm bed or boiled water on the unfamiliar stove, I reminded myself I chose this. I walked out. No one took anything from me. I left it. Of course, that wasn't entirely true. Something had been taken. Not the house or the money or the job, but the version of me that believed love could protect you. That version had burned quietly, night after night, while I pretended not to notice the ashes collecting at my feet. The day after I moved, Brielle called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice cracked and high like she'd been crying or trying to. "Celine. I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear. I didn't. I didn't know what I was doing. I played it once, then deleted it. What was there to say?" She had always been like that. Thoughtless. Carefree. Drawn to the nearest spark, even if it burned everything around her. But I'd always forgiven her. Every bad decision. Every mess she made that someone else had to clean up. I'd been the older sister with the mop and the tight smile. For years. But not this time. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want an explanation. I wanted peace. Work, ironically, became my refuge. Martin kept his distance. Not because of guilt, he never was the type, but because he knew he'd lost his edge with me. The dynamic had changed. I'd seen too much. And I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't doubt him. I didn't file a report or march into HR. I didn't need to. Watching his charm start to falter in rooms where it used to own the air, that was enough. People started looking at him differently. Whispers. Raised eyebrows. A few women on the team gave me knowing nods in the hallway. The balance had shifted, and he felt it. Still, the silence between us remained professional. Cordial. Which, for a while, suited me just fine. But healing is a strange thing. It doesn't follow schedules. It doesn't care about your workload or your vacation plans or whether your groceries are in the fridge. It shows up at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday when you wake up from a dream where you're still living in your old house and you can smell his aftershave in the hallway. Or at a stoplight when a song comes on that you forgot he loved. And you sit there, blinking into the red glow, wondering how you became a stranger to your own memories. There was a night like that about 3 weeks after the dinner. I'd just gotten back from a client event. It was late. The city was quiet in that eerie way Austin gets sometimes, like it's holding its breath. I opened the fridge, took out a bottle of wine I hadn't planned to drink, and poured a glass. I didn't turn on music. Didn't check my phone. I just sat there, barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, sipping wine and staring at the condensation forming on the glass. I started thinking about the little things. Like how Neil always used to open jars for me without saying anything. How he had a bad habit of leaving socks by the foot of the bed. How Brielle once gave me a necklace from a street vendor in New Orleans and told me it would protect me from heartbreak. I'd worn it for years. It was still in the drawer by the sink. I got up, walked over, and threw it out. Some things don't deserve to be remembered. Later that week, Neil texted. Just 2 words, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I turned the phone over and went to bed. I didn't owe him anything. Not anymore. But it was strange how quickly guilt can sneak in, even when you know you're the one who was betrayed. The world doesn't always side with the quiet one. It sides with the one who cries louder, who begs, who writes long texts in the middle of the night. And Neil had always been louder than me. I saw him again unexpectedly. It was at a grocery store of all places, Central Market. I was in the produce aisle, debating peaches, when I looked up and there he was, standing in front of the bananas of all things. For a second, neither of us moved. He looked tired. A little thinner. Still wearing that stupid brown leather jacket I hated. "Hey," he said. "Hey." We stood there in the artificial light, surrounded by melons and celery, and it felt absurd. "I didn't know you still shopped here," he said, like that mattered. I nodded. "Yeah." There was a pause. "I've been meaning to reach out," he said, voice softer now. I cut him off gently. "I know." He looked down at the floor. "You look good." I didn't respond. And then, as if someone had flipped a switch, I turned my cart and walked away. There was nothing else to say. I didn't cry in the car. Didn't fall apart when I got home. But that night, I lay awake listening to the ceiling fan and wondering how love can disappear without a sound. The weeks after that grocery store run blurred together like fogged glass. You think you're moving forward, working, eating, showering, but sometimes it's hard to tell if you're healing or just distracting yourself from the sound of your own heart trying to beat differently. I found myself getting into these little routines. They were never planned, just things I clung to without realizing it. Morning walks around Lady Bird Lake before the world woke up. Buying myself tulips every Saturday, even though I'd never liked them that much before. Spending an hour every evening on my tiny balcony with a book I rarely read, just watching the sun slip behind the skyline. It wasn't joy. Not yet. But it was something close to peace. I didn't speak to Brielle. She kept trying. There were texts. One-liners mostly. "Please. I need to talk. I miss you." At one point, she sent a photo of the two of us from some summer years ago, standing barefoot in Mom's backyard, dripping popsicles and sunburned shoulders. No caption. Just the image. Like memory was supposed to fix what betrayal had broken. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry anymore, I wasn't. Not exactly. I just didn't have room for her in my life anymore. She was a part of a version of me I'd outgrown. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to go back to the house. It had been sitting there untouched. Neil was still living in it, but I needed to collect the last of my things. Some books. A few paintings. My mother's jewelry box that I hadn't been able to face before. I called ahead. Told him I'd be there around 2. Asked him not to be home. When I pulled into the driveway, it was jarring how familiar everything still looked. The same mailbox with the dent on the side. The wind chimes that had once driven me crazy during storms. The potted plant on the front step that I had watered every Sunday without fail. It felt like walking into a ghost version of my life. The inside was mostly the same. A few things moved around. A new rug in the living room I didn't recognize. A faint trace of cologne in the hallway that wasn't Neil's usual scent. I moved through the house like a stranger. Quiet. Careful. As if the walls might remember who I used to be. The jewelry box was still in the guest room closet. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly. Inside were a few old rings, some tangled chains, a locket with a photo of our parents on their wedding day. I ran my fingers over the velvet lining and felt something sharp rise in my chest. Not pain, exactly, but nostalgia twisted with grief. The kind that doesn't sting until it settles in your throat. Then I heard the door. I froze. "Celine." It was Neil. "I thought you said 2, I called out, voice calm but tight. "I was out. Just got back," he said, stepping into the room. He looked surprised to see me on the floor. "You okay?" I nodded, still holding the locket. "Just grabbing the last of it." He watched me for a moment. "You want some coffee?" I looked up at him. It was such a simple offer, but it hit me harder than I expected. How many times had we shared coffee in this house? Quiet Sunday mornings. Post-fight silences. Moments when love felt like it might survive, if only we could keep drinking coffee and pretending everything was fine. "No," I said. "I should go." He stepped aside as I stood, carrying the small box. I've been in therapy," he said, suddenly. "Just trying to figure myself out." I stopped in the hallway. "Good." I was broken, he added, like it would change something. I didn't know how to deal with how far we'd drifted. I turned to him, finally. "You didn't need to deal with it by sleeping with my sister." His face crumpled a little. "Not enough for pity. Just enough to register." "I know." I nodded once and walked past him. No goodbyes. That night, I unpacked the jewelry box and placed it on a shelf in the apartment. I didn't wear any of it. I just needed it near me. A small reminder that some things, no matter how buried, are still part of your story. By spring, I had stopped flinching at the sound of my own name. It's strange how long it takes to stop seeing yourself through someone else's eyes. I'd spent years adjusting who I was depending on the room I walked into. At work, I was polished and precise. At home, I'd been careful, always careful, to be accommodating, even when I didn't recognize the version of myself doing it. And around Brielle, well, I was always the older one, the grounded one, the fixer. But all of that was done. The day the idea came to me, I was sitting at an outdoor cafe near Barton Springs. It was warm, the kind of warm that seeps into your shoulders and makes you feel like maybe things aren't so heavy anymore. I was flipping through a local arts magazine when I saw it, a call for community speakers for an annual Women's Leadership Summit. Keynote themes: reinvention, power, personal ownership. I stared at the page for a full minute, then took out my phone and sent an email. They wrote back within a week. The organizer, Melissa, said she was familiar with my name. She followed my work. She'd read one of my past op-eds about women in leadership and asked if I'd be interested in headlining a new session they were introducing, real-life stories from women who had navigated betrayal and turned it into strength. I didn't hesitate. That talk took 6 weeks to prepare. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. Not even the team at work. I wrote it in longhand at first, every night at the dining table in my apartment. Rewriting, reworking, shaping it carefully, deliberately, until it wasn't just my story anymore. It was a statement. When the day came, I wore a red pantsuit. Not for attention, but because it made me feel grounded. In control. The auditorium was packed, mostly women, a few men. A buzz of anticipation in the air. When I stepped up to the mic, I didn't speak right away. I just looked out at them, let the quiet sit for a beat, then said, "Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from people who once told you they loved you." The room held its breath. I spoke for 20 minutes. About trust. About power. About what happens when your life shatters and no one hands you a manual. I never used names. Never got petty. But I told the truth, layered and sharp and woven into every sentence like silk laced with steel. I saw women nodding, crying, smiling. When I stepped off stage, the applause echoed. And the best part? Brielle was there. I'd sent her the flyer anonymously 2 weeks before. She sat near the back, wearing sunglasses indoors, looking small in a way I'd never seen before. After the session, she tried to catch me near the lobby, but I walked right past her. Not coldly. Not angrily. Just done. There was power in that. Later that month, I was offered a guest column in a major lifestyle magazine. They wanted monthly essays from me about work, identity, healing. I said yes. I started getting invited to panels, podcasts, networking events where people asked me how I overcame so much with such grace. I didn't give them neat answers, but I smiled more. And then, one day, Martin got demoted. Apparently, someone had finally stepped forward about his behavior. HR launched a quiet investigation. The board didn't want a scandal, so they restructured. He was given a soft landing, a vague title, and a corner cubicle on a different floor. They offered me his job. I took it. On my first day as Chief Strategy Officer, I moved into his old office, repainted the walls, and brought in a bookshelf full of women authors. The secretary he used to flirt with stopped by to drop off files. She lingered a little, smiled. "Feels different in here now." I nodded. It did. Neil, as far as I knew, was still in the house. Still in that job. Still dragging himself through the same routines. I didn't think about him much anymore. But one afternoon, I got a forwarded email from a mutual friend, a link to a podcast episode Neil had guested on. Some small-time business show. He was talking about resilience after relationship failure. I listened. He used phrases I'd once said to him in passing. Words about growth, truth, accountability. I smiled. Even in his attempt to reclaim his narrative, he had to borrow mine. That was enough for me. I never needed him to suffer. I just needed him to know I had thrived. And not in spite of him. Because I stopped waiting for him to catch up. Because I let go of the part of me that ever thought his choices had anything to do with my worth. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't fire or fury. It's silence. It's success. It's walking into a room and knowing you built yourself from the ashes, not as a survivor, but as the damn architect.